Deep dive on PR Genius.
Okay, get this. The robots are reconstructing the cities of ash and void below the sea. And in the time of P, the black, sucking void will rise. That, the learner, is where we're starting today. You've given us this, well, pretty wild mix of stuff. Writings, apparently by someone named Wilbur von Junst, and then excerpts from the Subsite Classic Texts Archive. We're talking titles like Your Instructions, The Third Fist Part 1, and, well, this one called the What the Hell application form.
It's like, wow, where do you even begin? We've got what could be apocalyptic prophecies right next to what feels like a guide to extreme individualism. And then bam, something that reads like a really cynical flyer trying to get you to join something. It's a lot.
It is. So what we're going to try to do, like always, is find the signal in all this noise. We'll dig into this collection, try to figure out the main ideas, the things that keep popping up, and hopefully we'll get some insight out of it, even if it's, wrapped in some pretty weird packaging. This might feel a little like wandering through a strange dream, but we're here to point out the most interesting parts.
And for you, the learner, even in all this apparent chaos, there's a chance to connect with some anxieties and questions that go beyond this specific group. We're talking authority, conformity, the search for meaning, just, seen through a very particular lens. We want to help you understand some of these cultural currents without having to sift through it all yourself.
Let's start with this Wilbur von Junst. These pieces we have are full of this, intense end-of-the-world feeling. Underwater robot cities, the sea rising at the poles and in lakes. He's painting a pretty vivid picture of an apocalypse.
Yeah, and it's constant throughout his writing, this sense that some huge disaster is coming, this black-sucking void that keeps appearing. It seems to be like a central fear, almost like it's the result of society falling apart and the environment being destroyed. It's interesting that even in this, fantastical context, these worries about pollution and corruption come through.
And then there's P.E. Dog, always in all caps, bold, underlined, clearly a big deal in all of this. He's warning about, corruption, poisoned water, cities full of radiation, and his waste is apparently polluting the stark fist of removal. Doesn't sound good.
Right. This stark fist of removal comes up a lot in these materials. It seems to represent some kind of ultimate judgment or a force that wipes out anything that's considered unworthy. It's a pretty powerful, if undefined, idea of consequence.
And von Junst doesn't mess around when it comes to his call to action. Forget gentle persuasion. He's telling people to run to their household kingdoms, make evil alliances, and get armed. Guns, food, gold, and importantly, comic books, all to destroy the unworthy. Quite the survival guide.
It's like a total siege mentality. It speaks to this complete lack of trust in society and a retreat into these smaller, potentially hostile groups. And the fact that comic books are right there with the survival essentials, it tells you something about their values. Entertainment, maybe even escape, is crucial, even when everything's falling apart.
And then he talks about selling your soul to the space brain. Again, all caps, lots of exclamation points. What do you have to give up? Apparently a long quest for sex and drugs and death. Pretty direct and kind of unsettling.
This idea of making a deal with some higher power, maybe even alien, in exchange for earthly pleasures and ultimately death, it taps into a long history of esoteric and countercultural thinking. The space brain-S could represent a rejection of traditional religious figures in favor of something more abstract, maybe even technological.
Right, and then it gets even stranger. He says Nanton, which seems to be nature, is against these rebel gods. And then there's this cryptic reference to what happened to Eris after a big divorce. Feels like he's building a mythology, but in pieces.
Yeah, and those pieces don't always fit neatly together. That's typical of belief systems that borrow from different sources, creating something unique and sometimes contradictory. And Eris, the Greek goddess of discord, definitely points to chaos and upheaval in this worldview.
Okay, then we've got the old ones, and they're, he calls them degenerate spawn. They're hanging out in mountain cities, not a pretty picture. And they're contrasted with this great race, which is apparently the lesser of two evils. It's a strange hierarchy of beings.
There's definitely some Cthulhu mythos vibes here with these ancient, powerful, and often malevolent entities that existed before humans. The idea of degenerate spawn and a great race points to a complex and maybe even dangerous cosmic history.
And just when you think you're starting to get it, von Junst drops a quote from Aleister Crowley's Liber al Velagus. To worship me, take wine and strange drugs. It's like he's trying to be provocative.
Absolutely. Liber al Velagus is a key text in Thelema, which is a philosophy and a cult system focused on individual will. Including it here shows that they're intentionally taking these ideas and putting them into the subgenius context.
And then there's the Age of the Child, whose name and number are unknown. People are running away, showing respect to the patriarch, whose time is up, by the way, and the mother, who is dying slowly in the future. It's a weird take on generational shifts and power dynamics.
This concept of eons, or distinct historical periods, each with its own ruling principles, that's another idea from Thelema. The passing of the patriarch and the dying mother, they could symbolize the decline of old ways of thinking and the uncertainty of what's coming next.
Then we get these contrasting images. The black pearl with the crystal lotus versus the jewels cast up on the beaches of Arle. He wonders if the lotus is for the forgotten ones or for Isis's smoking Seti. So many different symbols clashing together.
It's like he's throwing together these very different images to create a sense of mystery and potential conflict between these spiritual or cosmic forces. Arle, the sunken city of Gulu, Isis from ancient Egypt, and Sati, this intense form of sacrifice. It's a lot to unpack.
Right, and there's this fear surrounding the child of the eon, just described as like words of Adam and energy. They're building shrines to its captive spirit. And then he asks, why use numbers if all are infinite, all the same? It's like questioning all these established structures and limits.
Describing the child as embodying these fundamental forces, that aligns with some interpretations within Thelema. And the questioning of numbers in a context of everything being interconnected, that suggests a rejection of rigid categories and a move towards a more unified understanding.
Okay, and here's where it gets really strange. Funyuns talks about the sleeping wake, where living people won't die and the dead will be walking around crazy cities during the night of Bob with like swirling electromagnetic energy. The Night of Bob sounds like a big deal in their belief system.
Definitely. The Night of Bob seems to be this pivotal moment where things change completely. Life and death are blurred. There's this intense, almost supernatural energy, and it's all connected to this figure of Bob.
And speaking of Bob, apparently the book is being rewritten with the writ of the child that has come. This child, he can't read or write, but he can live, breathe, eat, and draw. It's a very primal image of a new beginning.
The fact that the child can't engage with traditional knowledge, like reading and writing, that could symbolize a break from established dogma. It's like they're relying on more fundamental, instinctual ways of expressing themselves.
Then we have this servant, or maybe prophet, in a basement wilderness, calling out to the child who has beetle wings in the astral void. And then things take a turn, like a really sharp turn. UFOs are connected to hell creatures who are doing well, and the lamp of hell is breathing into houses. It's a very specific and pretty lurid vision.
This weird mixing of totally different things, mystical stuff, technology, and the profane, it's typical of this kind of countercultural mythology. They're rejecting conventional boundaries and trying to find connections in unexpected, even shocking places.
Right. And it doesn't end well for the child.
Right.
He's poisoned and murdered before he can, as they say, purge. And there are watchers in satellites. He even uses the Hebrew word Gragon, looking for his birth in the desert. No one knows when it'll happen. It has this very dark, almost biblical, but twisted feel to it.
Yeah, this idea of a prophesied birth being hunted down by powerful forces, it definitely has parallels in biblical stories. And using the term Gragon, often associated with fallen angels, that adds a layer of darkness and supernatural intrigue.
He ends by saying that the sacred and only true cosmology subgenius is almost finished. And he asks this crucial question. Are you experienced, Mr. Mutant? Followed by the address for the Church of the Sacred Space Puppet and that very clear praise Bob or die warning. Quite the ending.
That direct address to Mr. Mutant, it emphasizes that there's an in-group here, those who identify with this very specific worldview. And repeating praise Bob or die, that really cements the central, almost godlike role of Bob in their belief system.
And that leads us right into your instructions from the Church of the Sacred Space Puppet. This reads like a very direct, forceful set of rules, almost like commandments.
It is. It's blunt, almost aggressive. It's a call to completely reject mainstream society and all its conventions.
The main message is resisting conspiracy normal programming. That's the very first instruction. And it just keeps escalating from there into this really long list of, well, unconventional advice.
Yeah, this idea of conspiracy normal programming shows a deep distrust of societal structures. They believe these structures are designed to control and suppress individual freedom. Resisting this programming is their main goal.
And the instructions are all over the place. Some are pretty tame, like be different from them and ignore or distort all fashion, but then it gets pretty extreme. Things like kill them in the streets and smash all governments and exterminate all leaders. Pretty intense.
That violence, while shocking, is probably more symbolic in this context. It's an extreme way of expressing their anti-establishment views and rejecting conventional politics.
But it's not all about destruction. There's also stuff like resist all conformity, speak out for complete mutant freedom, laugh at them before you kill, which is, a very specific and kind of unsettling combination. And then it gets into things like building fallout shelters, buying comic books as religious texts, preparing for the end, muttering in the streets.
That mix of practical, almost survivalist advice, like the fallout shelters, with the embrace of countercultural things like comic books as sacred texts, that's a key part of this. It combines a sense of impending doom with a celebration of the absurd and the things they value outside the mainstream.
And the list just goes on and on. Eat junk, run wild, destroy authority, quote bizarre sources, lie, make bombs and guns, disrupt life, declare difference, scream the truth, store food, hoard, carry weapons. It's a complete guide to being an outsider.
Yeah, it's a guide to challenging and subverting everything society tells you to do, from your own behavior to how you engage with politics. It's a deliberate embrace of chaos and nonconformity as a way of life.
And then it goes even deeper into esoteric territory. Things like practice death and fertility rituals, design your own church, invoke forgotten elder gods, steal, make burnt offerings to childhood gods, believe in devils, watch for UFOs, Jesus, mutate, strike fear into normals, alienate humans, vandalize. It's a real trip through all these countercultural and fringe ideas.
They're taking ideas from occultism, fringe science, and mixing it with this general sense of mischievous rebellion. It's all about going against the grain.
And it all builds towards this explosion of instructions. Get drunk, watch TV, stop caring, never give up, quit your job, and slack off. Slack is a really important concept for them.
Slack is like the state of being free from all the drudgery and rules of mainstream society. It's about pursuing your own desires without any pressure or expectations. It's about personal freedom.
Right, and it doesn't end there. Make weird signs, consort with strange characters, con family friends, look for art in the gutter, make tapes of winos, go to bed, cure yourself, invent, snarl, be free, harangue, marry, levitate, baptize, cast out false prophets, burn, smite archdemons, contact aliens, use black magic. It's a huge list of things you're not supposed to do, all in one place.
It's like they're deliberately trying to do everything that's considered unacceptable. It's a declaration of radical individuality turned up to 11.
And then it culminates in this desperate outburst, or kill me, hey! Followed by their contact info, again, and the praise Bob or die message. It's intense.
That cry of despair adds a whole other layer to this. Maybe it hints at the inner conflict and the potential consequences of being so nonconformist. And the praise Bob or die part, that reinforces how important the central belief is. It's not optional.
Okay, so after all that, we get to Subsite Classic Texts. This is their archive of, and I quote, subgenius classics and holy texts, which they're giving away for free, which even they admit is insane for them to do.
That self-aware, almost joking tone is typical of them. Even when they're offering their most important text, there's a sense of defiance and a rejection of the usual ideas about intellectual property and access.
They divide the content into 3 categories. The holiest of subgenius documents, classic rants, and 3- and 4-fisted tales of Bob. It's like a very particular kind of religious library.
Right. There's a clear hierarchy to their writing. You have the foundational holy documents, then the passionate rants, and then the narrative tales. All of it contributes to their mythology and beliefs.
And the examples they give in each category are pretty telling. Under the holiest of subgenius documents, you have the book of the subgenius, the prescriptures, the brag of the subgenius, and, importantly, your instructions, which we just talked about. Seems like a pretty essential text.
Putting your instructions in the holiest category shows how important it is to them. And the other title suggests they have a whole body of work that covers their core beliefs, pronouncements, and, well, self-promotion.
Under classic rants, we see your instructions again, which is interesting, along with titles like Nazi Ken Mall Zombies, Bomb Rant, and Drugs Rant. So it seems like these passionate, often outrageous commentaries are a big part of what they do.
The rants are how they express strong opinions and criticize different parts of society. They use provocative language and humor. The titles themselves give you a sense of how unconventional and satirical they are.
And then you have the 3- and 4-fisted tales of Bob. This includes a bunch of different story titles and authors, including The Death of Bob Dobbs, which seems like a pretty significant event to have multiple stories about.
The Tales of Bob highlight how important stories and myth-making are in the subgenius tradition. And the fact that Bob dies but is still around suggests he's more of a legend or a mythical figure than a real person.
There's even a Not For Kids section. which, suggests some of their stuff is more adult or maybe transgressive.
Right, they're acknowledging that not everything they produce is for everyone. It hints at content that might be considered controversial or offensive by mainstream standards. It just reinforces their outsider status.
And it's all hosted on Subsite, the official website of the Church of the Subgenius, maintained by the Subgenius Foundation, Inc., in the name of J.R. Bobs. And they're very clear about their trademark and copyright. It's like organized chaos.
It is. Even with all the randomness and rebellion, the Church of the Subgenius and its output are actually quite structured. They're making a deliberate effort to spread their ideas, even if those ideas are inherently anti-establishment.
Now let's get into the third Fizz Part 1. This is a story about a character named Li Jing, and he's facing a Tyrannosaurus Rex, regretting his decision to leave China and join the Subgeniuses. Quite the opening.
Talk about setting the scene. It's absurd, it grabs your attention right away, and it perfectly sets the tone for a story that's going to be surreal and probably satirical. It's this mix of everyday regret with this crazy, dangerous situation. It's brilliant.
And he's got these really philosophical, almost darkly humorous thoughts about dying honorably and how his fossil might confuse future historians. It's very self-aware.
That self-awareness, the mixing of humor with impending doom, that's something you see a lot in Subgenius stuff. It's how they deal with serious topics with a bit of detachment and irony. Maybe it's a coping mechanism for how absurd they think life is.
We get a flashback to when Lai arrived at Dockstock and his relationship with Ivan Stang. They seem to connect because of their shared sense of humor. Stang even sponsored Lai's education in America. It seems like a genuine connection at first.
Yeah, and showing that relationship between Lai and Stang is important. It gives the reader a way to relate to this world of the Subgeniuses, which is otherwise pretty strange. It shows how normal their connection was before Lai gets exposed to the really weird parts of the church.
But then Lee gets to Dallas and finally understands how involved Stang is with this strange Church of the Subgenius. He's definitely experiencing some culture shock and feels like Stang maybe downplayed how unique this organization is.
That culture shock is crucial to the story. Lee's traditional Chinese background makes the extreme weirdness of the Subgeniuses stand out even more.
Stang is really vague about what happens at the Dockstock campout. He says it's not typically American, but then also that it represents the spirit of America. Lee's intrigued, but also a bit nervous.
Stang's contradictions just make the Dockstock event more mysterious and intriguing. It suggests that it's something that can't be easily categorized, something that challenges what people think about American culture, maybe even satirizes it.
And Lee's first impressions of Dockstock and the people there are just full of these wonderfully weird details. A bald guy with a huge mustache, a black man with long hair and a beard, a woman with no shirt kissing a guy with neck hair and multiple mustaches. It's like a picture of nonconformity taken to the extreme.
It's a visual representation of their core belief. Be different. Embrace your individuality no matter how weird it might seem.
Stang and Dr. Sterno greet each other by trading insults, then hug. Then Lee meets Dr. Snavely, who has a wandering eye, and proceeds to cling to Lee like a lemur. The social interactions just get weirder and more unsettling.
It's clear that the rules of normal social behavior don't apply here. It seems like breaking those rules is accepted, even encouraged.
Stang explains that everyone acts crazy, including himself, but it's all just subgenius. It feels like a blanket excuse for anything strange that happens.
It's all just subgenius is like their motto. It's how they frame and explain behavior that might otherwise be considered odd or even disturbing. It shows that they have their own distinct identity and way of seeing the world.
Leeds really feels like an outsider among all these mostly white people. He notices the pictures of Bob everywhere and the constant laughter that doesn't seem to make sense. He's not fitting in.
Lee's feelings of not belonging show just how insular the subgenius community is. They have their own shared culture and jokes that make them feel like they belong, but it also excludes anyone who's not in the know.
And then we get into what actually happens at the campout. Musicians are setting up in front of a plywood backdrop with Bob's face painted on it. Lees meets Reverend Buck Naked, who talks about Yetis. It's just one strange encounter after another.
The campout is like a gathering of eccentric people doing unusual things. It shows that the subgeniuses are intentionally and often humorously rejecting mainstream society. And Bob is always at the center of it all.
They start passing around frop. It's this white vegetable that smells terrible. People are putting it under their eyelids, in their ears. It's all very ritualistic, and they start chanting and hooting and laughing. Lee's pretty freaked out.
The frop and the weird ways they consume it add this whole psychoactive element to the gathering. It blurs the lines between a religious experience and an altered state of consciousness. Lee's fear shows that he's not used to this and finds it unsettling.
Liak asks Stang if it's a bad drug, and Stang just says it's frop and that it grows in Tibet. Then he coughs up a lungful and his eyes are glowing, and Leah realizes everyone's eyes are glowing. It's a super weird and unsettling moment.
The glowing eyes add this supernatural, or at least very unusual element to the frop experience. It makes it even harder for Lee to understand what's going on and emphasizes how different this reality is from the one he's used to. It also makes you wonder what frop really is and what it does.
Then there's this cabin called Church Air, where a guy named G. Gordon is giving out balloons of Bobby souls. All caps, their emphasis. People inhale this gas and start saying weird things in deep voices. It's like a strange ritual, but with helium.
The church air ritual seems to be another way for them to have a shared altered experience. Maybe they think those nonsensical things they say are some kind of spiritual revelation, or maybe it's just a way to get more disoriented and laugh together.
This guy, Paul Mavrides, inhales a balloon and starts floating in the air. He tells Lee this cryptic message about Lee's relatives in China, a bribe, and Bob picking him up. Then he crashes to the ground unconscious. And the weirdest part, nobody even seems to notice.
This levitation and the weird message make the story even more uncanny. And the fact that nobody reacts shows how normal these unusual events seem to be for them. Like, it's no big deal.
There's this other guy, puzzling evidence, who talks super fast, and then a skeletal man on stage is shouting about not being able to escape his own legs and, Bob. Then Lee sees a line of men going into a dirty tent and thinks it's a brothel, which really disgusts him. It's just one bizarre and often misinterpreted event after another.
It's just more and more weird and disturbing behavior that Lee sees at Dockstock. It challenges everything he thought he knew about America and morality, and the fact that he misunderstands what's happening in the tent shows the huge cultural and moral gap between him and the subgeniuses.
G. Gordon comes up to Lee and asks if he's tried any good, healthy prairie squid, then explains it in this really crude and suggestive way. Lee is totally confused, then horrified by what he means.
The prairie squid conversation brings in this crude and unconventional sexual element. It just adds to Lee's sense of being alienated and morally outraged. It shows that this group is totally fine with embracing and even enjoying things that are considered transgressive.
Lee has had enough. He decides to go back to China, convinced that America, based on what he's seen at Dockstock, is way more morally messed up than he ever imagined.
Lee's decision to run shows how deeply shocked he is by this culture. He can't reconcile the bizarre and seemingly immoral behavior with his own values.
He talks about how bad everything smells, the weird taste of the food, the music that's so bad it's physically painful, and so chaotic it seems to kill bugs. He completely rejects the whole experience, even on a sensory level.
All those negative sensory details emphasize how uncomfortable and alienated Lee feels at Dockstock. It highlights the huge difference between what he expected and the reality of this subgenius gathering.
He tries to hitchhike out of there and sees this sign in a tavern that says, "Do not enter without woodskin and a gun." Not very welcoming.
That misspelled, threatening sign just reinforces the feeling that this place is dangerous and lawless. It makes Lee want to get out of there even more and confirms his negative view of this part of America.
But then, surprise, he gets picked up by J.R. Dobbs himself, driving this old roadster. Lean is shocked, especially since Stang told him Dobbs was dead.
Dobbs suddenly appearing when everyone thought he was dead changes the whole story. It makes you wonder who Bob really is, what his connection to the subgeniuses is, and whether you can trust anything Stang says.
Dobbs seems to know Stang and drives back towards Dockstock. He doesn't even care about the loud, chaotic music. He just says he wants to see the boys. Like, all this craziness is normal for him.
Dobbs acting so nonchalant about the chaos at Dockstock and knowing Stang suggests he's not just a symbolic figurehead. He's an active part of this strange world, maybe even the most important part.
Back at Dockstock, Dobbs tries to talk to Stang and some others, but they're all too caught up in their own weird conversations to even notice him. He gets bored and starts watching the musicians and a young guy doing the church air thing. It's like Dobbs is this ghostly presence among his followers, even though they're totally devoted to him.
It shows this weird contradiction about Bob Dobbs. He's the center of their worship, but he's also kind of ignored by his own followers. It suggests his role is more symbolic, or maybe he's intentionally elusive.
Dobbs looks at Leas and says he's probably the only one who's innocent enough to believe in him. And then, out of nowhere, he asks Lee if he speaks Chinese and knows Kung Fu. It's a sudden shift.
This is where Bob starts to interact directly with Lee. It implies that Lee is there for a specific reason, maybe even a crucial one.
Dobbs gets serious and asks for Lee's help. He wants Lee to go on this dangerous quest to save humanity from, get this, madman, mudmen, and dinosaurs. He says he needs a subgenius boxer who can also translate Chinese for the Chinese version of Bob. It's a completely ridiculous proposition.
It's a quest that only makes sense in this bizarre subgenius logic. The sudden seriousness, the absurdity of the mission, it all shows just how surreal and maybe even allegorical this story is.
Dobbs tells Lie that the anti-Bob is getting stronger in the past that might have happened, which is basically the afterlife. And he says the anti-Bob is going to, and I quote, literally fucking the Earth. He even makes a gesture to emphasize his point. It's a pretty graphic description of the threat they're facing.
The crude language and gesture highlight how serious this is, and also how the subgeniuses use humor and often vulgarity to talk about these big ideas.
And to make things more personal, the anti-Bob has kidnapped Dobbs' wife, Connie. He shows Lie a picture of her, and then another picture that's much more revealing. It's a surprisingly personal and somewhat tawdry detail that motivates Dobbs.
Adding Connie and her kidnapping to the story gives Dobbs a more personal and emotional reason for this mission. The contrasting images of her add another layer to his character and make you wonder about his motivations.
Dobbs' plan is to go back in time through something called the Vortex, to consult with all the different versions of Bob, Caucasian, Oriental, African, American, Indian, and the very first Bob, the Yeti Bob, who apparently lived in Atlantis. It's a massive and totally bizarre undertaking.
Trying to consult all these different Bobs across time and cultures makes Bob seem like an archetype or universal feather in their mythology. Like his essence exists beyond specific forms and historical periods.
He summons the Vortex, which is this psychedelic fountain of swirling shapes and colors. Then he grabs the plywood backdrop with his face on it and says that's how they're going to travel. It's a super low-tech and hilarious solution to time travel.
Using the plywood backdrop as their vehicle perfectly captures how low-tech and improvisational their journey is. It's a funny contrast to the cosmic scale of what they're doing. It shows they're resourceful, but in their own weird way.
They ride this makeshift surfboard through the light inside the vortex, with Dobbs surfing on the energy waves. They go faster and faster, spinning through the vortex tunnel. It sounds like a crazy, disorienting experience.
Describing the vortex as this place where you surf on light waves creates this vivid and surreal image. It emphasizes how fantastical this story is and how effortlessly Dobbs seems to navigate the impossible.
They suddenly pop out into this bleak, smoky landscape that looks like wartime Germany outside Berlin. Dobbs thinks they either took a wrong turn or the anti-Bob messed with their trip. It's a big detour into a very dangerous place.
Landing in wartime Germany adds this element of chaos and unpredictability to their journey. It suggests things aren't totally under their control and that someone might be interfering with their plans.
A Panzer tank with a swastika on it shows up, and Dobbs, who clearly hates Nazis, runs right at it. In this totally slapstick moment, he trips on a pipe, which somehow makes the tank explode. It's totally accidental heroism.
That scene mixes slapstick comedy with unexpected violence. It shows how often things in the subgenius world happen by chance and are absurd. And Dobbs hating Nazis, that's a brief moment of conventional morality in this otherwise very strange story.
Dobbs just dusts himself off and starts talking about how he's killed Hitler before and tells this bizarre story about infiltrating the Nazi regime. And then he picks up a piece of trash. It's this weird mix of epic and mundane that makes him so interesting.
That constant contrast between grand claims and everyday actions is what makes Bob Dobbs so hard to figure out. It's hard to tell where the legend ends and the litter picker begins.
They run into this old blind woman begging for money. Dobbs gives her what looks like trash, but it turns out to be a business card for an eye doctor and a bunch of cash. Kindness disguised as indifference.
It's a strange kind of generosity where his actions seem mean but actually help her. It suggests that Dobbs understands people's needs in a deeper, less obvious way.
Suddenly, Dobbs needs to find the Indian Bob. He summons the vortex again, and they end up in the middle of a western prairie next to a burning stagecoach and a bunch of dead bodies. Dobbs thinks white outlaws did it.
Shifting to the American West brings in another historical and cultural setting, and Dobbs being wrong about who caused the violence sets up this contrast with what they're about to see.
They see a U.S. cavalry regiment attacking a small Sioux camp. Dobbs gets really angry. He finds a cowboy hat and gun belt, jumps on a horse, and charges into battle. It's a very impulsive and heroic moment.
Dobbs jumping into the fight shows that he has a strong sense of justice, even though he expresses it in a very unconventional and over-the-top way.
Yeah.
He's not just watching, he's taking action.
Somehow, Dobbs single-handedly takes out the entire cavalry, using his guns and even his bare hands, and he never gets hit by a single bullet. The rest of the Indians come out of their camp and finish off the party.
Deep dive on PR Genius.